Hi and welcome to this episode of Game Creation, and today we're looking at what controller input the person's using, like detecting that. So if I'm using the Xbox controller, then it knows I'm using the Xbox controller, or if I'm using the keyboard, it knows I'm using the keyboard. Now, you might think, well, why is that useful to know? Because if I press right on here and press right on here, it's going to have the same effect. And the reason for that is previous day's video. I said that press shift to continue, but if they're using an Xbox controller or a controller input, then it's actually really useful to not say shift, because it doesn't have a shift on it. Is shift that button? Or who knows? So we changed the displayed kind of helpful guides to reflect what they're actually doing. Now you can do this at the start of the game, and we will do this at the start of the game. It will detect whether there's a controller attached to the device, but a user might have a controller attached but be using the keyboard, so it does need to keep thinking to itself, well, what is the person using? So it's going to be quite an interesting video today, and quite useful for a wide range of things, because the keyboard is not the easiest thing to work out what button you press to do things, and same with the Xbox controller. It's not easy to know that, you know, A is attack, maybe B is attack. You know, you've got to be clear in your game, and no one reads the instructions that come with your game, unfortunately. You could have the most inspirational instructions, but most people just press play and just try and work it out as they go. So, I hope this is a useful video. Let's go to the screen. So, I've loaded up the previous file, and you can see here now we've got this nice little box at the bottom here which says press shift to continue, and we want that to change depending on what control they're using, whether they're using Xbox controller or a keyboard. So, let's figure out where best to do this is. It's not going to be a dialog box, because we might use this for other things as well. Probably the player inputs. Now, player inputs is its own little group, because the player movement, which is just general everything, the part underneath actually does the moving, because we were trying to write this code once, so we only had to write it once. It doesn't matter whether it's a keyboard or a controller they're using. So the player inputs is our area for just figuring out what control they want. So this is a good place to put it. I might put it as a separate group. So let's do that now. So insert group of events. I'll say detect controller used, or something of words to that effect. There we go. Okay, so in here we need to detect what controller they're using, and there's quite it's quite easy if you know where to go. So we're going to right click on here, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out whether they've clicked a button. So upon pressing any key. Upon pressing any key means they're going to be using the keyboard. So I might insert a comment there. I might say keyboard. That means they're using a keyboard. Okay. Now, how do we figure out whether they're using an Xbox controller? Well, we have a useful function here under the Xbox object saying any button pressed. Brilliant. And it's for player one, so one for player one. And you've got to be careful in this object, because sometimes 0 is player 1, sometimes 1 is player 1. I'm going to insert a new comment, and I'm going to say Xbox controller, if I can spell, which is not necessarily a thing I can do. Right. Okay, and now we're going to test this, and this is not going to be correct, and I know exactly why now, but this is the value of testing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a global value, and this is not one I'm going to keep. I'm going to set it to B, and I'm going to say if it's a keyboard, then set it to 1. I'm just going to click and drag that, and if it's a controller, then set it to 2. And we're going to test this to see if this works. So I'm going to just have a look at the global values. At the moment, nothing's set in the slot, because we haven't had any input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press down on my keyboard. There's a 1, and I'm going to use the D-pad to press up. 2. Perfect. And you might think, oh, this is fantastic, this is working really well. But if you use the analog sticks, it sticks to 1. And this is the problem, is the analog sticks do not count as a button, unfortunately. So we need to figure this out, because this is not working as we intend, because they have to actually click a button for it to work. So we've already got understanding of how this works. We've got the left stick H is the value of the left stick, so let's drag that into a new condition here. And what we're going to do is double click on that and say, if that is different to 0, if that's different to 0, it means that the left stick's been dragged horizontally. We need to put an OR logical in, drag it in here, it'll add it to it. And we also need to have the left stick left stick vertical, and see if that is different to 0. And that will still be detecting the Xbox controller. Now we should really do the right stick as well. So we're going to insert, and it's going to be the right, hang on. Oh, that's not how I do it. I'm going to compare 2 different values, and we're going to have the right stick horizontal. Now stick pressed is detected, so if you click in the analog stick, it will be detected as any button of player 1 is pressed condition, so we don't need to worry about that. And it's player number 1 is different to 0. I'm going to drag in the OR logical just to put it at the bottom. I'm going to drag in this. Now we don't need to do this whole thing again, because all I need to do is change this to a V. That's why I like naming in Clickteam, is you can just change it very quickly. Okay, let's test it and see if that works. So you just extend this and make sure you click into it again, otherwise the keyboard presses will just be mucking about with this and not the actual game. So down it switches to 1, D-pad it switches to 2, keyboard again switches to 1, and now the analog stick switched to 2. And let's try using down on the keyboard and just using the right analog stick. Works perfectly. It doesn't do anything in the game, but it does switch it perfectly. So now we've got a way of detecting which one they're using. Now, I've used global value B, but the problem with global value B is it doesn't really tell you very much. And later on down the line, I might need this function, and I wouldn't have a clue whether 1 means Xbox controller or 1 means keyboard. And so sometimes it's better to save these as global value strings. So set global value string. Now I don't think I've used any of the global values, so I'm just going to put this as keyboard. Click OK. I'm just going to remove that and then drag that down to replace it, and this will be Xbox. And then drag that down to replace it. So let's have a look at that now. And this time it's the strings, but there's nothing in it at the moment, so let's put that bit of sand back. There's nothing in it at the moment, so it won't show. There we go. So at the moment that's keyboard, because I'm using the keyboard, and if I use the analog stick, perfect. Now, one of the problems is that there's nothing in there initially. So what I need to do is we're going to have like an initial stage, so I'm going to insert that on top of this. Actually I might put this on top of the whole thing. So insert a new event. I'm going to say starter frame. And now there's a few different ways of doing this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to keyboard first. Then I'm going to click that, Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste it. And then what I'm going to say is I'm going to insert is gamepad connected. Is it connected? And this is from 0 to 3. So 0 is player 1, 1 is player 2, etc. This is why I said before it's a bit confusing because they use different numbers. So it's player number 0. Is player number 0 connected? If so, switch to Xbox. So this is quite common in programming, that you set a default value that you assume they're using the keyboard, but if their game controller is plugged in, then we assume they're using Xbox. And you might think, well, hang on, but they could have an Xbox controller plugged in, but they might be using keyboard. Well, the point is that as soon as they click anything on the keyboard, it will switch it to keyboard mode. So let's just run that and see if that works. And you can see straight away it's the Xbox because I've got the controller plugged in. But as soon as I use the keyboard, it will switch straight to keyboard. So it's clever enough to, because you need to have a starting state, and without them clicking a button on it, then it's very difficult, well, it's impossible to tell which one they intend to use unless you had some kind of heat sensors in the keyboard and the controller or whatever, who knows. So you've got to make an educated guess, and if they've got a controller plugged in, chances are they're using a controller, but we've made it so that it can switch back if needed. And the final thing to do is, well, first of all, we need to name that global variable we've used, and always if you use a global string, name it so that you don't use it later on. And this will be input, either input or input device. Let's put input device. So this is the input device. It's either keyboard or Xbox. And now you can see input device to Xbox, input device to keyboard. So the way I keep track of which ones I've used is to rename them, because I know that I haven't used global string A before because it's not renamed. And something you could do is just put in keyboard straight into there, and I don't need that event anymore because it's defaulted to that. So if I delete that, that's perfect, and it's just less code, and it's a bit easier because I can just load this up and I can see all the default values straight away. Some people have a preference to do it in code because they can see what the alternative is when they're kind of in that block of code. So it's kind of preference, down to preference really. Okay, so now we've detected that, we can go to our string, and we probably want to do it with the dialog box. We could do it up with the inputs, but you want to keep your code logical. So if I wanted to change it, where would I go? Well, I'd probably go to dialog box. And we just need to change the string. So we might have an always event, or we could just say, let's compare to global string. So if it equals keyboard, make sure you spell it right. And that will imply an always event. And equal to Xbox. And I'm just need to go to the frame editor and just copy and paste that. So Control A, Control C. Control A just highlights it all. Control C copies it. And we're just going to change the ultrable string to that. Should have really clicked into it. And I'm just going to click and drag that, because all I need to do is say what button that needs to be pressed, which I assume is going to be A. I mean, it could be B, I suppose. Okay, let's run that and see if that works. So I'm not touching anything, and by default the controller should be Xbox. So press A to continue, refresh it, and I'm going to press down and press Shift to continue. So that works nicely. The problem with that is that's always going to be working. Now, with all these things, probably it's best not to have something that's always running, because that's always converting the string to press Shift to continue. It's just or press A to continue. It's always doing that. So you might want to think, well, you probably want it only before it's shown, and with this function here. That's only happening every so often. It's not happening that often. So I might just drag that in and just put that in there so that these events aren't firing all the time. And let's just check that still works. So it should say press A to continue, because I haven't pressed anything. And then it should say, if I go down a bit, it should say press Shift to continue, which it does. And you've just got to be aware that an always event, which this on its own effectively will always run, and it will just slow the game down if you do it too much. Now I know I've done it with this one, but I know I'm not intending on keeping that forever. I will decide on the font size that needs to be down the line, and if I change it to a different font and the font looks not very good at the same font size as the visible text, then I might just change that anyway and make it just have a decision on it. So just always make sure that your always events are limited. And one of the things I do when I go back and look through my code is look for anything it's constantly doing, and I ask myself, does it have to constantly be doing that? And there's sometimes the answer is yes, but mostly the answer is no. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to see more from us, please click subscribe. We release videos every single weekday at 7 PM UK time. Thank you.